Hello! Welcome to A Witch's Yarn, a mystical book club led by your host, Esther Dawn. In this podcast, we explore questions about the world of witchcraft and paganism through reading and research. Each episode, we read and discuss a multitude of topics, from deity worship to spellcraft. So grab a cozy beverage, get settled in your favorite chair, pick up your craft of choice, and join me as I tell you a witch's yarn. Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 7 of A Witch's Yarn podcast. I'm your host, Esther Dawn, as always. Before we get started, I want to let you know I have some sort of grossness in my throat, so I may sound a little weird. We may have to cut this off early. I'm also recording this Monday night for that same reason, so editing's not really going to happen very much, so it might just be kind of one of those where it's come as you are. I'm excited to share these interviews with you that I've read this week from Sara Raztresen's Where the Gods Left Off. Update on that, actually. Sara has just come out and just put a second book out for pre-order, the second book in this series. She has continued to interview gods. The one I'm most excited to read is the interview with the evangelical egregore, who, if you're not familiar with, is the quote god that is the hateful god that so many people worship, where they completely forget about Jesus's whole love your neighbor as yourself thing, and instead they're focused on, anger and blocking people out. So it is on pre-order. I believe the book comes out in June or July. I'm not being paid to say this. I just think her books are really good, and if you're interested, if you liked this book, I highly recommend you going and pre-ordering her second book. So today we are going to be talking about Azazel through St. Nicholas. So we've got kind of a wide range of figures here today. Azazel is where we're going to go ahead and get started. And again, this might be a weird episode. I might be kind of fuzzy. My voice might sound weird. All sorts of fun things might happen. We're just going to power right through, okay? Also, it's 5 million degrees in my office. So, because we haven't quite figured out the air conditioning system in this new house yet. All right, so my cozy drink for the day is not actually a cozy drink so much as it is I'm very dehydrated drink. I have some electrolyte water in the flavor strawberry lemonade, because that is like my weakness is strawberry lemonade. I also just had a snack of some kettle corn. My craft of the week, I am still working on the baby blanket for my coworker. I have taken a break from the belt that I was making for Careedwin, just because I've been struggling with it and I'm trying a new technique and it's been kind of rough. But I will get back to it. Alright, so let's get started. So Azazel is a fallen angel. He is fallen because in the Bible and in the book of Enoch it talks about how the sons of God came to earth and slept with the daughters of men. Now, the sons of God being angels. Azazel was one of those. And when he did that, he came down and he, copulated with women. And he gave humanity knowledge that we apparently were not ready for. And because of that, he was punished. And he had to watch his family essentially be destroyed. This is in the book of Enoch, which I think I said last week is on my to buy list, but it's not currently in my possession. So this is secondhand information that I'm getting from web sources and things like that. Now there is a big old quote. Well, no, So essentially after this, so there's this whole thing where he goes down, he gives knowledge to the people, God finds out. After this, God commands that Azazel be bound up and tossed into the earth, where no light may reach him, and that to him all sin be ascribed. This is why later in Leviticus you'll see the command to give up 2 goats, one to be killed as a sacrifice to God, and one to have a paper with all the community's sins tied onto it in writing before it's chased away from the village into the desert. The desert was where all unclean spirits and lawless things were thought to reside once upon a time, and the function of Azazel is made clear. He is the sin eater, the one who swallowed up the wrongs of the community, specifically on the day of Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. Lots would be cast to see which goat went to God and which to Azazel, hence the scapegoat. Which that is something I did not know. But yeah, so apparently, in the old times, they would just cast a goat out into the wilderness to give the sins to Azazel. And the concept of a sin eater has been around for centuries. So not only is it common in that case, but they would literally have, what is it? I think it's Fargo. The show Fargo, where there's a literal sin eater who lived hundreds of years and but literally his job was to, quote, eat the sins of other people. So it's not a concept that has died out. But yeah, but it went from being a fallen angel to being a human being at one point. So essentially he, like I said, he had to watch the woman that he, copulated with and his children, I believe, be destroyed. Now this again is all secondhand information and I'm still a little fuzzy, but I highly recommend, if you're more interested in that, if you want more details, to go find a copy of the Book of Enoch. I'm sure it's available online, and dig more into that story. Maybe you can let me know what you find. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get into the questions Sara asks. So the first question she asks is, what interested you in human women? And at first he's talking about humanity in general, and he's like, humanity is always different. We're always coming up with different solutions for different things, and we're just kind of interesting to watch. I think in the same way that we find toddlers to be interesting when they're coming up with new and creative solutions for things. I feel like that, goodness, there is all sorts of ruckus happening outside and my window is open because I'm trying to combat the heat. So I apologize for any extra noise you hear. But yeah, so he finds humanity different. And like I said, I kind of think of it like when we're watching toddlers and we see them come up with this really wild and crazy solution for whatever small problem they have, but it works. With that kind of fascination. But she's like, no, I mean specifically the women. And Azazel's attracted to our features and physical beauty. And he was talking about the way women hold themselves, and I think he's just a purveyor of beauty. He appreciates beauty, and I appreciate that. And so she asks him, why did you teach humanity all the things that you did? And he says basically that he saw our potential and wanted to help us harness it, even if it ended up causing pain for himself. So and for us, he talks about, Sarah, there's this moment where she's like, well, did you expect us to do what we did with it? And he's like, no, I did not expect that, but I still don't regret it. And I think that's kind of, again, my illusion, my mind goes back to toddlers, is you can teach them something, right? You can teach them how to... My dad taught me to whittle when I was young, right? And I never did anything mean with it. I mainly just like stripped the bark off of sticks and called that whittling. But, you know, a kid could take that skill and they could make fun little animals or creatures or whatever, but you could also make weapons with that. And so I don't think it was his intended purpose to, you know, let us hurt each other, but that's what ends up happening. And I still think he doesn't regret it because, you know, we still made progress, and he still feels that it needed to happen. Okay. So she asked the question about, so apparently he has been, there's a story that he and Paimon were originally one being, known as Shemyaza or Shemash. And that was a being that eventually was split in two and became King Paimon and Azazel. And he is essentially like, no, that's not true. I've always been my own person, or his own angel. He's never been anything else. And just like we've heard from so many other divine entities, the details don't matter. It does not matter if he was originally someone else or not. The point is, this is who he is now, and the details are not so important as the moral. And that's something I think we all just struggle with, especially in humanity, and especially someone with me, like me, who wants to know all the details and wants to know every bitty little thing. I remember reading, of course, you know, like most people, my introduction into the Greek pantheon was the Hercules movie, right? Because I was a child of the 90s and the 2000s. And I loved the Hercules movie, and from that I started reading like children's mythology books. And of course, children's mythology books, they try to like tone it down, right? They try to not like be quite as graphic as some of the original myths were. And then when you read the actual myths, and you don't realize that it's not like these stories are thousands of years old. There's different versions upon different versions upon different versions. And so when I first read something where the story was slightly different, I just about lost my mind. I was like 10. I was like, no, that's not how it goes. This person's wrong. And it was Edith Hamilton, who, if you don't know, is like kind of a renowned... She's one of the old, like, big names in Greek mythology, like her mythology. So I was reading it. I was like, no, that's not right. She's not right. But because we get just so caught up in these details, when the details really aren't what's important. It's the overarching story. And again, just him and Persephone and a bajillion other divinities have said, stop worrying about the little things. Focus on the big things. She asks him, what kind of work do you do in the infernal realm? And essentially his job is to manage, quote, the human filth that we create. And it's basically all the evil that demons get blamed for. Again, I think we talked about this last week too, is that humans are perfectly capable of creating horrible situations without the interference of any divine creature. We've seen it time and time and time again. Like, you think of Hitler, that was not a demon possession, that was just a horrible man. You think of serial killers and other historical horrible figures, and no, they weren't possessed, they were just horrible people. And the more we acknowledge that, I feel like I say this about men who say, well, real men don't do this. But the thing is, they are real men. They are real people. We can't use the cop-out of, well, they were possessed. Because then we can't take responsibility for the fact that we could be just as horrible if we don't, if we let ourselves be that horrible. If we say, no, it was a demon, and I would never let myself be possessed by a demon, then you don't acknowledge that humanity is capable of great, great evil. Anyway, so what's the difference between a demon and a fallen angel? Okay. So he says on page 259, fallen angels are not demons. We started holy. We were created from a wholly different source. Demons are feral little things, the minor ones. Demon doesn't actually accurately describe gods and angels, but spirits who are their own thing and go their own way, whatever that way is. Excuse me. We fallen angels and gods corral them too. So she's seen demons before, but she didn't realize what they were. They're these tiny little gargoyle things that were like around during Lucifer's interview and a couple other interviews. And it was the first thing she saw when she was about to do the interview with Lucifer, was this like gargoyle thing that was coming after her, and when she had that moment of doubt, if you recall. But essentially, at least minor demons, they're just kind of like very annoying imps, right? Like they're essentially just they're harmless as long as you let them be, right? Whereas fallen angels come from a more powerful source, a different source, as opposed to being created to be this, quote, force for evil. And I don't even think they're really meant to be a force for evil so much as they're meant to be a force of chaos. At least that's what I get. It isn't really said in the text, but that's just kind of what I get from that, is they're more like little chaos fiends running around. Let's see. What does it mean for angels to have perfect knowledge? Now, she's talked about this before. Angels don't think like human beings. They're so logical. Their brains have been made in such a way that they can't comprehend the way things that we do, in kind of that emotional, in the moment kind of way. And basically, angels can see both sides of the coin. So Sara talks a lot about two sides, one coin. And we are like bacteria. I'm not saying that in a bad way, but we're like bacteria on one side of the coin. There's billions of us, right, on this one coin. But we can only see that one side because to us, that's the whole world. But angels are bigger than that, and they can see both sides. So they can see everything. They can see both sides of the argument, the good and the bad, and then, potential outcomes in a way that we just can't from our perspective. So Sara asked, how did this happen? How did you become a fallen angel, essentially, if angels have no free will? And angels can become reckless, knowing things as they do. They're still capable of making mistakes, and because of their knowledge, they must be punished for them. So free will does not mean perfection. I don't think there's any being in existence that's perfect. I'm going to be controversial here, but that's the joy of being a Christian, which is I get to do that, and say that even the Abrahamic God is not perfect. There's a book called The Death of Omnipotence and the Birth of Omnipotence, and it's a book that Sarah's recommended, and I have not read it yet, but I've read a synopsis. And essentially what it's saying is that it's God, even in the Bible, it talks about how God had to hear about something happening. He heard about what was happening in Sodom and Gomorrah. He heard about the plight of his people in Egypt. And if he was omnipotent, wouldn't he already know those things were happening? And so instead of saying they're omnipotent, so all-knowing, omnipotent means all-loving. And so that's kind of the view of God I take, is he's not necessarily a, quote, perfect being, but he is an all-loving being. But because he is given these angels, right, this divine knowledge that we don't have access to. They don't get forgiven the way we get forgiven because they are meant to be above what humanity can do, right? And so when he saw this woman and he went and did these things, he did it knowing full well that he should not be. Even though he was being reckless, he still knew what he was doing could be harmful. And so because of that, he had to be punished. And so Sara asks this question, and gosh, it kind of breaks my heart a little bit, and she says, do you love God? Now again, this is me as a Christo-pagan coming from this. And he's like, he can't. You know, he wants to, but his heart is set on love. And Sara asks why he can't be forgiven, and she even asks God, like, hey, why can't you forgive him? Good Lord, what's that cat up to? And essentially she's told to mind her business. And essentially she's just given this like feeling that all will be right in the end, like it will all work out. I don't think that God intends eternal punishment for anyone, not even angels. But there has to be there has to be some sort of recompense. There has to be some sort of punishment, right? But I don't believe God is a God of eternal punishment. I don't think he ever was. I feel like people made him that way. I don't think he ever was in the beginning. And she asks, how do you see yourself? And he gives us, oh gosh, what card was it? The Four of Pentacles, which is about greed. Like greed, possessiveness. He's greedy and he gets what he wants, but he also realizes that none of that's permanent. And I think that's kind of, it goes back to like, Sara says that she got a vision in her head of a woman when he was talking about like earthly women, about human women. And her interpretation was that this was the woman that he essentially literally fell from heaven for. And I mean, I don't have anything to disprove that, so, I mean, it makes sense to me. So it kind of gives you this feeling of, like, this wasn't just lust. Like, this was something more than that. Oh my gosh, I'm going to throw this cat. I won't actually throw the cat. I'm just thinking about it. But, you know, you get this feeling that, like, he had to be separated from this person that he loved, but eventually, like, it will be made right again. But he understands that he was greedy and he did these things. And eventually all the things that he gets are going away. Like, there is no permanence in any world. How do you want to be seen? I have a quote on page 262. So the card that we get is Strength Reversed, and Sara's interpretation is weakness, breaking down, losing control, issues with problem solving. That's what she says the card means. And then he says, I have experience with the things this card describes. I have been weak in my choices and made messes I couldn't get out of. It's important people face the consequences of their actions. There are no do-overs for certain decisions. Forgiveness can be a long way off. No one pities you when you make mistakes. More often, your one sin becomes 1,000 others that other people pile onto you to absolve themselves with no personal effort. Can you bear it? This is what I ask because this is what I know. Heavy. That's really heavy. And essentially because, you know, he is seen as this sin eater. Like, you send your sins out into the desert on this goat as a gift for Azazel. Like, he is the sin eater. He's a scapegoat. His job is to take the sins of the people, right? So, and he sees that, and it's hard, and he recognizes that it's hard. You know, you lose control. It's pain. But yeah. And so Sara, there was her last question was, at the beginning, she kind of assumed that, you know, he would be open to talking to her and be excited to talk to her just based on the simple fact that she's a woman. And, like, it took a while for him to warm up to her. Like, it took her a while, if you've read it, which I hope you have. Like, it took him a while to, like, actually start answering her questions because he just was not interested in talking with her. And so she kind of had to realize, I need to stop making assumptions about this person, this entity, just because I assumed he would be interested in talking to me. That doesn't mean he was. And so her last question is literally, can you forgive me for being an idiot tonight? And he essentially says we don't always need forgiveness. We sometimes just need to move on. So he's got this whole thing where he's like, why do you keep asking me this? Or why do you keep asking people this? Why do you need others' forgiveness? You made a mistake, own up to it, move on. And I think that's hard, as, like, even if you're not currently Christian. A lot of people here in the United States were raised Christian. And we come from that evangelical background of, well, you must forgive others because this, that, and the other. And he's essentially saying, no one has to forgive you. You do not have to be forgiven. And you do not have to forgive others. And you need to be okay with that. And that's hard. Especially if you're someone like me who's a people pleaser and you want everyone to like you. Not being forgiven by others is tough. But yeah. So the overall impression that I got, he understands what happened to him and why, but he doesn't regret it. He did his thing. He had this experience. He is now a fallen angel, but through all of that, he is still happy that he did what he did. And I just hope, I can't say for certainty, but I all I can do is hope that one day, he hopefully gets reunited with whomever he wants to be reunited with. I hope that the punishment really is not eternal, essentially. So our second interview is someone who's really interesting. His name is Saint Dismas. Now, Saint Dismas, this is a Catholic saint I had never heard of until recently because I did not grow up Catholic. So, Saint Dismas, so if you know the story of the Bible, if you know the story of the crucifixion, which this is really appropriate because Easter was literally yesterday at the time of this recording. If you know the story of the crucifixion, Jesus was not crucified by himself. There were two thieves, one on each side. And one of them is mocking and scorning Jesus, and the other one tells him, hey, stop that. This is the Son of God. He's done nothing wrong. And he essentially asks Jesus, remember me. And Jesus says, today you will be with me in paradise. And so Jesus dies before them. But this man, this unnamed... They're all right. I swear they're all right. But this man was not named in the Bible at all. Chai, Wivey. Are we good? I think we're good. All right, so this man was not named in the Bible. He has no name, but over time, in the first few centuries of the church, he was given a name and he was canonized as a saint. And the name Dismas means sunset to the west, or possibly dying in Greek. So that's where he gets his name. His name is Saint Dismas. And on page 265, she gives a list of what he's the patron saint of. He's now the patron saint of reformed thieves, condemned criminals, including those on death row, funeral directors, and undertakers in the Catholic Church. So yeah. So the first question Sara asks him is, what caused you to become a thief in life? And essentially he says greed. Like, he had enough to live on, but not enough to be happy. Essentially, like, according to him. He wanted, but the thing is that the more wealth he gained, that didn't give him any comfort, that didn't give him any peace, so he just kept stealing, and eventually he was caught. I mean, that's And that's the thing, is when you try to fill voids in your life with material things instead of, peace and comfort. And again, this is not just coming from a Christian perspective. Whatever spirituality makes you feel whole, makes you feel better, and makes you feel comforted and loved and, whatever you need, that's what you need. You don't necessarily need 5 bajillion Bibles or 10 bajillion crystals or, a ton of video games, or, this, that, or the other. You need emotional well-being, not stuff. So that's where he was coming from. Is he had that same thing that a lot of people have. And I will tell you, I'm not one of those people who are like, oh, you need to live in poverty and give everything up to God. I'm not one of those people. First off, because that would be incredibly hypocritical of me. And second off, because it is much easier to have a spiritual journey if all of your creature needs are met, right? You're not hungry, you're not thirsty. Which is not to say that you can't have spiritual experiences while you're fasting or, going through intentional moments like that. But I'm saying, like, as an everyday citizen who does not like to be uncomfortable, it's much easier for me to connect with the divine if I know that I know where my next meal is coming from. So that's just kind of what I mean by that. Her second question is, why did you speak up for Jesus? And essentially he's like, he realized on the cross that Jesus was worth more than the gold he had been chasing, and he didn't want to hear people talk poorly about him. And he's basically like, I heard that this criminal on the other side who was jeering and saying all these horrible things about Jesus, and it just didn't strike me as fair because, we had been the ones doing something wrong, not Jesus. We were the ones who had, stolen and done things. Jesus hasn't done any of that. He didn't deserve to die. So yeah, I think he was just trying to be a good person. Like in those last moments of life, he was just like, he doesn't deserve this. Okay, so the next question, she asks, what is paradise like for you? He gives her all these beautiful visions, and like there's a cliff with green, and there's like water, and there's all these beautiful things. There's this woman with a crown of stars, and he won't tell her who it is, and I'm really curious, but I don't know either. But like there's all these beautiful images, and essentially he's just showing her, this is paradise for me. And the impression that I get is that paradise might be different for every person. And there's still this concept of reincarnation. Like not everyone goes straight to paradise. You might go through a few more rounds of like living here on earth. But, yeah, there's this concept of, at least to me, I feel like paradise might be different for every person. Like, some people say you won't. And again, the concept of hell and heaven is different when you're a Christopagan, but you hear things like, oh, you won't recognize your family, everyone will be sexless, and you won't know your family, and this, that, and the other. And to me, it won't be heaven without my parents and my husband. It just won't. Like, paradise is being with the people that I love. So, I don't know, maybe I will be so whenever I get wherever, maybe I'll be so busy doing this, that, and the other, I won't even think about it. But I cannot imagine heaven without my parents. I can't imagine heaven without my pagan friends. I can't imagine heaven without, my Kemetic witch aunt. So, yeah, I think that, paradise looks different for everybody. All right. Number 5 is a doozy. What do you think about people's focus on salvation? And this is where we get into the hellfire and brimstone. You're going to go to hell if you don't do this, that, and the other. Types of people that I just adore. That was sarcasm if you couldn't tell. And there's this big old quote, but I'm gonna focus on two quotes. Okay? First one is on page 269. And he says, "When you treat salvation the way I treated my gold, you get corruption and decay. There is no paradise in greed and selfishness." Prosperity gospel. And then on 270, a quote from Sara. "No one knows how to hear God, especially those so obsessed with salvation, and they're losing the plot for it." Okay, because he's like, remind them, you have to tell them that what they're doing is not going to lead to heaven. And I think it's because, and again, I'm not saying give up all your riches. I'm saying do not treat physical objects as the end-all, be-all of what makes you a good or bad person. But I think it's also talking about the people who are, again, who are fire and brimstone and, well, you're going to hell because you listen to rock music, like those kinds of people, and where it's performative. They're like, I am so better than everyone else. I don't do this. I don't do that. I am so above everyone else. I would never deign to be around these people when Jesus was eating with prostitutes and tax collectors, which, fun fact, tax collectors in the ancient world, the reason why they were so hated was not just because they were collecting taxes, right? It was because they were commissioned. Tax collectors at this time were commissioned. Hey, I need you to bring me a certain amount home. Anything up on top of that, you get to keep. So they were essentially intentionally padding their numbers so that they would get a bigger cut whenever Rome came to collect their part. That's why tax collectors were hated. It was not just because of taxes, it was because they were thieves. So Jesus was out there dining with prostitutes and tax collectors and literally like what most people would consider, quote, the scum of society. But they had their priorities in order, right? Like they gave up their earthly things to focus on the spirituality that worked for them. Whereas the people in power at the time, gonna draw some parallels here without being too, just catch my drift, okay? But the people in power were so focused on the appearance of piety that they weren't actually worried about being pious. Does that make sense? I ask like someone's sitting in front of me. I'm literally staring at my microphone. But like you've got these people who are saying, well, I'm better than you because I follow the law. And whereas these people who weren't necessarily following the law, but actually were doing what God commanded, love each other, love your neighbor. It's a very hippie kind of thought, right? Anyway. I hope you caught the parallels I was trying to make really subtly, but not that subtly. Yeah. So how do you help people that call out to you? Asks Sara. He helps people see that everyone deserves a second chance. But you have to choose to be helped. I underlined that. You have to choose to be helped. Okay, I've talked about this before too. It's like the story of the man there was a hurricane and he was standing on his roof while everything was flooded, and like 3 people came to rescue him, and he said, nope, God's got me, I'm good, you go ahead. And then he ends up in heaven and he's like, why didn't you save me? And God's like, well, I sent a boat, a speedboat, and a helicopter. What else did you want me to do? You have to want to be helped. You can't just assume everything will be done for you. You have, I said this before too, your practice without your mundane effort is nothing. You can't just do the magic without putting the actual effort behind it, right? Same concept. You have to want to be helped. And that kind of also goes into how do you see yourself. You have to want to be helped. You have to want to be helped. I'm going to say that a million times. She asks, how do you want to be seen? And he has his mind in the right place, and he knows what's important. So he went from being this thief who, tried to rely on wealth to make him, happy and make him feel fulfilled. I can't say that word for some reason. And eventually he ends up realizing that no, the priority is spiritual well-being. And in his case, God and Jesus. But it could also be whatever spirituality works for you. Sara makes that actually pretty clear throughout this book, that it's not necessarily just focusing on, she's coming at it from a Christian perspective because she is a solitary Christian. She's not a Christopagan, she's strictly Christian. But, she makes it clear, whatever works for you, works for you. Anyway. Okay. Last messages: listen to yourself, fix what's wrong, don't take shortcuts. I'm really bad about trying to take shortcuts because I'm lazy. But you have to keep your eye on the prize, and you have to do the hard work if you want things to turn out. Overall impression: we all deserve second chances. Now that is a hard one for me, from some personal things in my life. But again, that goes back to when we go to Azazel, when he was like, you don't have to be forgiven. It's true, we don't have to be forgiven, but we still deserve to... Okay, so I'm going to say it like this. We all deserve a second chance. Does that mean I have to trust you again? No. I am a human being. If you hurt me in such a way that you make me feel vulnerable, unsafe, etc., I don't have to forgive you personally. Do I feel like you can go out into the world and have a chance to be a good person somewhere else? Sure. Do I want any part of that? No. I think that's what I mean by that. So we're going to go on to Prince Stolas. We are moving right along tonight, ladies and gentlemen. All right. So Prince Stolas is an owl demon with long legs. Sara said when she first started talking with demons, she was really excited to meet Prince Stolas, specifically because he's an owl with long legs. And I think that's kind of funny. But first quote is on page 273. A master of herbs, astrology, and crystals, he can teach the magician many things about these tools and systems, as well as bring some much-needed wisdom surrounding them. Skip a little bit. Prince Stolas is a scholar of heart, and in true scholar fashion, prefers not to be bothered unless necessary. Felt. I feel like Prince Stolas and I would get along. Specifically because I also do not wish to be bothered unless necessary. There's another quote on page 274. There are different types of demons, some of which are evil and some of which are just spirits of obsession that collect knowledge like a dragon collects gems, and who are happy to share it with those who will properly appreciate their time and effort. Stolas, I get the impression, is the second kind, where obsessed with knowledge. Again, I get that. So her first question: what has you so interested in your research? And essentially he's like, knowledge is power. And it's so cliche, but knowledge is power. And sometimes you don't need brute force to succeed over an enemy. Sometimes what you need is just the right information. He has no need for physical altercations. That's not his thing. He's interested in the subtlety of, cloak and dagger. It's weird. It's not really a good comparison, but my first thought was Littlefinger in Game of Thrones. Or even, oh God, what's his name? Starts with a T. Lannister. I don't remember. He's one of the Lannisters, the short one. But yeah, he trades in knowledge, not in physical fighting. And I don't mean Littlefinger in how Littlefinger was skeezy and nasty, but the whole cloak and dagger, I can win you over with just a word and some knowledge. Because Littlefinger was skeezy. Number 2, what do people take for granted about astrology? And just like magic, people tend to use it for petty reasons, when it can be used for so much more. Now, we'll get in a little bit into a discussion with Zadkiel, who is a dominion. And the dominions, like, part of their job is to move the heavenly bodies around. And so she asks him a question about astrology as well. So we'll get there. She asks, were you ever an angel? And he says, yes, he was a principality. So he taught humans just like Azazel did. But he taught kind of more refined things. So again, I've got this image of just like this scholar. My image like has a separate owl. I don't think of him as the owl himself, but I've got the scholar and like the mage's robes. Like, I think of, if you're a fan of Dungeons and Dragons and you know the world of Faerun, I think of like a mage in his Waterdeep tower, just like collecting knowledge. But yeah, his job was literally he taught people things, just like Azazel did, but different things. Why do you appear as an owl or a raven? So he likes the fact that they are ill omens in a lot of cultures. But also that they're birds of intelligence. So if you look at Native American mythology, owls are considered bad omens. If you look at some other, because they're carrion birds, right? They're birds of prey. They're scary. They come when bad things happen, right? Because that's where the food is. But they're also incredibly, incredibly smart. If you've ever... there are ravens in, when we get into Welsh mythology, actually, we'll talk about this. There are ravens at the Tower of London. And there's actually a Welsh connection there as to why that is. But if you've ever seen them talk to these ravens, like, these ravens talk back. They're super smart creatures. And so I've never seen Hell of a Boss. To preface this next question, I've never seen it. But she asks him, because he's in Hell of a Boss, what do you think of Hell of a Boss and other media? And I said, I haven't watched it. He says he can't change it, but he thinks we need to remember the origins of the caricatures we create. Like, we kind of, when we create these characters that are lovable, right? In these shows that are of demons and things. Again, demonic does not necessarily mean evil, right? But they are still powerful creatures that deserve respect. And if we rely on media like Hell of a Boss to just kind of inform who they are, we end up with, we end up getting ourselves into trouble. Number 6, she asks, what do you think people take for granted about demons? Older practitioners abused them for knowledge. That's where we get like the Solomonic witchcraft and things like that, Solomonic mages. Newer practitioners seem to want to build a working relationship. So, wanting power without giving due respect, I think, is what he's going with. That is they're demanding instead of working with. And she asks, what is it like to command demons as a prince of hell? And he does it because Lucifer wants what's best for us, just like God. And there's a quote on page 277. It's a thankless job, but it must be done. I mean, he's considered a demon, right? Most people aren't going around saying, thank you, Prince Stolas, for keeping all of these little imp creatures bound up. But it's something that has to be done, and he and many other infernal divine do exactly that. Good Lord, my throat is hurting. We'll see what happens. We're going to keep going. How do you see yourself? And he's earned his stripes. Like, he's worked hard. He's sacrificed a lot, and he's earned, like, he deserves respect because he's earned it. It's not just because he, he wants respect because he wants it. Like, he's worked hard for it. And last, messages. And he finds knowledge more important than other people. And I don't think he means it in like a, save the books before the people kind of way. But if people are being ungrateful, and if people are not giving you respect or not showing you love that you feel like you've earned, sometimes books are better than people. The one guy, Sven, reindeer, the reindeer are better than people. I'm not going to try to sing it right now because my voice hurts. But yeah, sometimes books are better than people, especially mean people. And again, so my overall impression was I kind of got this image of like a stoic professor or like a mage locked up in his tower studying his ancient tomes, right? All right. Zadkiel. So again, I told you we were going to talk about Zadkiel. We're going to start here with a quote on page 280. Zadkiel is a powerful angel that helps people understand the compassion and mercy of God, as well as take on those values into their own daily lives. He has an alter ego, Sachiel, an angel of fortune and wealth. So he's actually we get a two for one, right? So we start with, what does mercy mean to you? Is her first question to him. And it begins by being kind to yourself. You can't be merciful to others. You can't be kind to others if you're not kind to yourself, right? So he's big on, you need to rest. You need to give yourself grace. And once you do that for yourself, then you're able to do that for other people. And again, that's hard for me to do because I am constantly moving and running around and acting like a crazy person. But it is important. We need to take care of ourselves before we can take care of others. Number 2, why appear differently as Sachiel. And kind of the impression that Sara gets is that the names of the angels give them their power and their like purpose. And I kind of think of it as like putting on a mask and all of a sudden, or like, okay, stick with me here. Miraculous ladybug. When they they use their little things and they become their people, right? They're suddenly different people. The masks and these beings give them their powers. They don't just naturally have their powers, right? I feel like it's kind of the same thing with angels when they're given a name and all of a sudden they have all these responsibilities that come with the name. And they're kind of blank slates underneath that name. So if you read the Bible and you see a message from God given by angels, a lot of times that message is given in first person and the angel is speaking as God. And so Sara asks, why talk in first person as if you are God? And he says they are messengers and they don't dare to change a single word of God's message. Like, their job is literally to convey exactly what God says. Which is, I get that. Like, if God's message is from God, then they're supposed to act as God's messengers, right? They are his voice. Number 4, how does astrology mesh with angels? So again, this is where we talk about the fact that he is a dominion, and dominions, literally their job is to move heavenly bodies around. Angels are so immense that astrology in some ways helps them make sense of us, right? So it's not that it's not so that we can comprehend them. It's so that they can comprehend us. Number 5, what do you wish people understood about angels? They operate on God's orders through faith. They don't act on their own. So again, we have this concept of free will, right? And while angels can act independently, they're still constantly under God's command, which is a little confusing when it comes to fallen angels, right? So that's some research I need to do, but essentially, like, angels they know what their responsibilities are, they know what God wants, and they work within that structure. What bothers you about the world? How easily we give up. That was hard to read the first time I read it. But essentially, on page 284, he says, people think themselves into a hole. The world is broken for all this. I can't thinking. All of these dreams and ambitions and negative thoughts waste them. So yeah, I talk to my students sometimes about their can-don't attitudes. We have 5 weeks left of school, and some of my older kids are ready to be done and move on to the next school. And so they just don't want to try. And so I talk to them about their can-don't attitude and how they're not going to succeed if they don't even try, right? And we do that to ourselves all the time. Instead of saying, well, I can at least try, they say, nope, not possible. Or I say, nope, not possible. And so we end up just limiting ourselves. And apparently that drives Archangel Zadkiel nuts when we don't just give it our best shot. What do you want to help people with? And he reminds us that we can't just move forward with no regard for others. We can't go up the ladder and then pull it up after us, essentially is what he's saying. Like, or he kind of gives the example of like stepping on each other's toes to rush to the finish line, right? Like if we're harming others to, and again, parallels with reality, if we are harming others for your own gain, then you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing in life. How do you see yourself? He is the messenger who delivers the verdict of divine judgment. So he's not the judge, he's just the messenger. And he helps people remember their potential. And I think both of those are really admirable things, especially because, delivering God's verdict is, I can imagine, quite painful at times and quite tough. And then how do you want to be seen? He helps people see the glass as half full. So he seems to be like kind of a really optimistic angel, or he wants us to be optimistic, I guess. And I think that comes back to realizing our full potential. If we're seeing the glass as half empty and we can't do this, then, we're not going to get anywhere with life. Last messages. On page 286, compassion, mercy, kindness. It all starts with oneself. It starts with repentance of wounds you caused yourself or others, and with forgiveness too. Let go of old pain. Embrace the light of God's love. No mistake is too big to forgive, and no person is not worth compassion and mercy. When you're gentle with yourself, gentleness with others follows. So kind of a different message than what Azazel said. Like, Azazel's like, you don't need forgiveness from others and you don't need to forgive others. Meanwhile, what Zadkiel is saying, and this, again, this kind of shows, like, this isn't just Sara writing this, right? Like, this is coming from her experiences. But Zadkiel's like, sometimes you have to forgive others so you can be kind to yourself. You have to forgive yourself to be kind to yourself. And then you can use that to be kind to others. So two different perspectives there. And my overall impression is he's an angel who reminds us to be kind to ourselves so we can be kind to others. Like essentially what I just said. He's a glass half full kind of angel. So this has been a very Christian, pantheon kind of heavy podcast, and we're not finished, but we are on our last interview, and I apologize that this is shorter than our others. Again, my throat just hurts. It's like 8:27 at night, and I still have to get this edited and put out before tomorrow, and I'm not feeling the greatest, so I apologize that I'm rushing through and not giving quite as much commentary as I normally do, though some of you might actually appreciate that. We'll see. But we're finishing off strong with another Christian divinity in the form of St. Nicholas. Yes, we are talking to Santa Claus. She started, in the back half of the book, she starts, instead of doing specific Patreon like polls, she'll talk about what themes they want to talk about. And of course, St. Nicholas, the theme was winter. So he talks to St. Nicholas. Next time we'll get into Morana and Frau Bertha, and I believe next week is when we meet Baba Yaga as well. So lots of like Slavic area-ish, winter-ish deities that are really interesting. So stick around for that. I promise you next week will be a little less Christian focused and a little more world. But this is a really good interview, especially if you're wanting to know more about the real Saint Nicholas as opposed to Santa Claus. Her introduction to Saint Nicholas is really funny, and I know a lot of this because as a podcaster, I also like to listen to podcasts because, so there's a Christmas podcast because Christmas is my favorite holiday. Halloween's my second favorite. And it talked about the origins of Saint Nicholas, right? So one thing that you need to know about St. Nicholas is that he took no crap. There's an anecdote. It may or may not be true, but there's a story that at the Council of Nicaea, St. Nicholas punched another person for being a heretic. Now, I want to go to that kind of religious council where people are like punching each other. That sounds like fun. So that's one story, is he apparently punched a heretic. Now, what that heretic was talking about, I don't know, because it's been a while since I've listened to the podcast, but she also mentions it here in the book. Additionally, 2 stories. One, how he ended up giving presents to children, how that story got started. There was a story that a man had 3 daughters, and he was poor. He could not afford to give his daughters proper dowries back in the days when that was a thing. Like, you had to have a dowry to, find a good marriage. And so he, not knowing what else to do, was planning on selling them off into prostitution. St. Nicholas overheard this, and on one night, he tossed a bag of gold into their chimney, came down the chimney, and landed in the oldest sister's stocking where it was hanging by the fire. Sound familiar? So the next morning they wake up, she's able to be married off, and they're good for a little bit. Starts to happen again. They've run out of money. They don't know what to do. He's gonna sell off his second oldest daughter. St. Nicholas overhears the next morning. They wake up, and there is gold in her stocking for a dowry. Then the same thing happens for the third child. So that's how we kind of get the idea of presents for the children, right? There's another story involving 3 children. This time it's 3 boys. He was traveling through a town when he overheard a story of 3 boys who had gone missing. And the story had gone that they had been taken by a butcher and cut up for meat. Depending on the story, you might hear that these children, this is kind of graphic, I should warn you. Depending on the story, he either found their like butchered bodies, or he found them pickled in like barrels. And he ends up resurrecting them. And depending on the story, you end up with the idea of the, quote, whipping father, who was supposed to be that butcher who ended up following around St. Nicholas and whipping all the naughty children. So those are 3 stories of St. Nicholas. 2 just one just funny, 2 supposed miracles of St. Nicholas. So now we're going to get into the questions. So first she asks him, because you can't talk to St. Nicholas without asking this question, what do you think about the image of Santa Claus? And he kind of he's like, it's a really fun story, but it kind of distracts from the purpose, or my purpose as a saint, because it's become more about physical objects and toys than it has been about what I was trying to do in spreading my message of God's love. So the second question is, what do you think about Krampus and the whipping father? So again, the story of the butcher becoming the whipping father, and then Krampus, I'm sure everyone's heard of, there's movies and all sorts of things. He says the whipping father doesn't exist, which is good, because whipping small children makes me sad. And then Krampus exists, but is not under his domain. He is under Frau Berchta's domain. He calls her the White Lady. I think that's who. Am I right? Yeah, Berchta. Frau Berchta. And essentially he says Krampus isn't necessarily evil, he's just wild. Yeah. Again, you can't take media's word on things. If you remember Velis's interview forever ago, Velis was compared to St. Nicholas. And so Sara asks, what do you think? And she asked him what he thought, and he's like, yeah, we're both kind of weird dudes, but we're not really the same person. And Nicholas kind of agrees with that assessment. He's like, we're not the same people. I understand why people think we're the same, but we're not. And then on 291, he says, who can see a mess and leave it? But we're both odd men now, out causing a scene wherever we go. I suppose it's natural people would confuse us, purposely or not. So, again, I loved Velis's interview. I don't really feel called to work with him or anything, but I think he's fun. And he's so different than other gods of the underworld that we've seen that are so dour and, don't talk very much. And Velis is just full of life. So I get it. I get how they got confused. I understand it. I still think it's rather funny. But they are both of them rather adamant they're not the same person. Number 4, what do you think about gods that who became saints, like St. Bridget? Speaking of St. Bridget, I just picked up a book. I can't remember what it's called. I got it at my local metaphysical shop. It's about Bridget, the goddess. I'm really excited to read it. But anyway, tangent. So he hates that people felt the need to do it. Essentially, he's like, if early Christians would have just stopped beating people over the head with the religion, because that was not the intended purpose of the religion. It was not meant to become this dominating force. But if people would have just stopped doing that, then the need for gods to hide under the guise of saints would have never been an issue. But so he understands why it had to happen. He just hates that it had to happen in the first place. He doesn't hate that they became saints so much as he hates the fact that it was necessary for them to continue to be, given their due. Okay. How do you perform miracles or carry prayers to God? There's a big old quote. It's a big old quote on page 291. So he says, many have certainly claimed miraculous power when they've done nothing of the sort. Miracles are power hidden in your soul. You could also compare this to magic. And who made your soul? God. You have to be willing to let God guide you to finding and unlocking that power. You have to not just believe, but know that he hears you. All things are possible through Christ, remember. Prayer, however, is when you gather the courage to face God. Only then can you understand what God can do through you as one of his divine creations. Understand that magic not of God can only go so far. And by this, I assumed he meant magic from nature without God's help. Others with their other gods, have outside assistance too. So he's making it very clear it's not just God, it is gods. But it's about asking God to let his design flow through you to affect the world. Our power channels it. So when you think about magic that way, it's really powerful. We are channelers of divine energy. Like, we can do our own magic. We have the power to harness nature and do our own magic, but it's so much more powerful when we invite the divine to join us. Whether that is God or many of the dozens of other deities that exist. So that's really cool. Thoughts on how people treat relics, and I have thought this for so long, and I'm so glad someone's finally saying it. People are so focused on the material crap, and it makes no sense to be worshiping a finger that may or may not have actually belonged to who you think it belongs to. That is my take, not Saint Nicholas's take. What he says it much more nicer. People focus on tangible things rather than what truly matters. So people are so focused on, oh my gosh, this toe belonged to Saint Catherine of da-da-da, instead of realizing these people were still just people. They were just people. You are focusing on body parts instead of who their power was coming from. Ugh. I think relics are silly. Anyway. Thoughts on your feast day. So in a lot of European countries, the feast day of St. Nicholas, which is in early December, is when people give gifts. And then on Christmas Day, it's like a feast and a celebration, but there's no gifts. It's more focused on God in European countries. But traditions can be great, is what he essentially says. So can coming up with new things that fit the world today. So the feast day, he enjoys the feast day. He thinks it's great, but again, if it doesn't serve a real purpose anymore, move on, find better ways to do it if you need to. How do you want others to see you? And it's a reminder of rest. He's a giver of gifts, just not physical ones. Gifts of, for him, he's a messenger of God, just like the angels are. Right? So he's big on, giving gifts of passing on the joys of God's light, essentially. Last messages. Trust yourself. Page 293. Trust your intuition, he said with a twist of mischief in his small smile. Trust what you see. The lesser light, the moon, is still light. Don't wait for perfect light to see. Just see and know your eyes will adjust. People need to believe in God and themselves if they're to understand their potential. And again, that's something I struggle with because I don't trust myself because I have anxiety. And the thing is, I think everything's a problem. And so I've learned that about myself. I know that I have anxiety. And so a lot of times I don't trust my gut when I'm having that anxious feeling because I'm like, nope, that's just my brain playing tricks on me. That was really difficult to say. And basically what he says is you have to trust that. Sometimes you have to trust your gut. Now, you have to use your gut to be able to discern as well. You have to say, okay, so this is my anxiety talking, or am I actually having a gut feeling? And the same goes for any kind of issue you might have. You need to have that discernment, but you still need to trust your gut. My overall impression was Santa. I literally wrote it like it's the title of a documentary. Santa versus Saint, a focus on the immaterial. And I think, so next week we're going to go from Morana to Archangel Metatron. Archangel Metatron is cool because he was a human being that became an angel. So that's a really cool, interesting thing. I'm going to wrap this up super quick because I think my cat has accidentally locked himself in the spare bedroom. So like I said, next week it will be Morana through Archangel Metatron. As always, you can find me on social media, Blue Sky, Twitter, and TikTok at A Witch's Yarn. I am there. Feel free to email me as well at awitchesyarn@gmail.com if you have any questions, comments, concerns, absurd remarks. Our tarot card for the week is maybe. So I'm going to pop for me, or am I going to need to pull? I'm going to need to pull. Let's see. Queen of Swords. Let's see. Direct and to the point, frank, unpretentious, being upfront. This card alludes to the energy of a lively, intelligent person who holds considerable power for good or ill. So I think this honestly kind of goes to like what St. Nicholas was saying. Trust your gut, trust your intuition, be upfront about it. Don't add frills, don't try to spare people's feelings. You know what you know, and you're intelligent, and you should just follow that gut feeling. So if that resonates with you this week, I hope that helps. Trust yourself. Do not be afraid to be upfront. Do not be afraid to tell people like it is. Be kind. Do not do it in such a way that you are being intentionally harmful, but don't take no crap and give no quarter, essentially. But that does not mean you have to be mean about it. Just be no nonsense. Some people will take that as mean, but you know that is not the intention. Okay. So like I said, catch me next week for Morana through Archangel Metatron. Find me on social media. I'd love to hear from you. Have a great week. Don't explode. Goodbye.